Welcome everyone to Acton University 2021. Very delighted to be hosting this panel on entrepreneurship in Africa and various social questions, religious questions, thinking about what's going on today in the African continent. I'm very delighted to have with me three guests. Susan Namulindwa, who is the Vice President of the Canada-Africa Chamber of Business and also the President of the African Trade Desk. Sebastian Spio-Gabra, who is the chairman of the Canada-Africa Chamber of Business, and Father George Admike, who is a priest from Nigeria in the Diocese of Onitsha, and also is often in Rome, and has just not too long ago, I think, finished his doctorate at the Pontifical Gregorian University in Rome. I've had the chance to talk or listen to all of these participants, and be ready for great insight, great wisdom. Very, very happy to have all three of you joining Acton University 2021.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure.
So let's maybe begin. I want to talk about a lot of things, but why don't we just begin kind of on a big picture? This is about the state of the economy, Africa, entrepreneurship. What do you think are two or three of the great opportunities and also some of the big challenges that are facing Africa today? I mean, obviously it's a continent. Each country has different conditions. Sebastian is from Ghana, Susan from Uganda, and Father George from Nigeria. So you have different perspectives of your own countries, but also broadly thinking kind of Pan-African. What would you say are some of the big opportunities and challenges? Susan, why don't we begin with you?
Well, it's a delight to be here, Michael. Thank you so much for that invitation. Being from Uganda and talking right now, my first portion that I'm going to talk about is the state of Uganda right now with AIDS. Not AIDS, sorry. AIDS was before. I'm talking about COVID-19 right now. Mm-hmm. We are at, worse than the first wave. We have the variant from India raging right now. So as we speak right now, the situation is dire. So that's a big challenge. No vaccines, ICUs are full, and there doesn't seem to be a local solution. Everybody's raising their hands and jumping up and down and looking for help from somewhere else. And this, for me, is at the core of the biggest challenge of Africa right now. The pandemic has just happened to just highlight it a little bit more, but we've been there. Every problem that we have, much as we have solutions that we can craft locally, for the past so many years, we've always try to look external to find our solutions externally. I think the biggest opportunity right now for the continent, post-pandemic, taking in the lessons that we've learned through the pandemic, is to look to craft solutions locally. Don't get me started, but I think that's kind of where my headspace is this morning.
Well, maybe a quick follow-up. It's like when you say crafting solutions locally, what would be just one or two things that you think are the most important that you need to build?
Capacity within, and really believing in ourselves. I'll state since I started with the issue of health. Most of the big pharmaceuticals, the ingredients they make are really mostly plant-based. We have researchers on a continent that can have medicines, and there's proof, cure for cancer, cure for this and the other, using traditional herbal medicine. When we have those medicines, when those scientists are called hobbies or something like that, they're not called real researchers. However, those are the same herbs or trees that are concentrated and turned into the traditional medicine. So we have that. We talk about look at Sebastian and I and a lot of other people that I can talk about in a diaspora. We are born, raised, and educated on a continent. We are not there. However, we have solutions. I mean, you look at any research center or university out here in Canada or anywhere else, you'll find brilliant African minds on those universities. We can take some of that back home and do something for the continent.
Great. Sebastian, you want to follow up a little bit on your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I thank you so much, Susan. I would sort of take the view or the aperture maybe in another direction. I think the greatest challenge, not only facing the different African countries, but facing, frankly, the world, is the rise of China in all its metaphysical, scientific, geopolitical, economic, cultural sense. If one were to review the last, say, 300-400 years of human history, it's really been an Euro-Atlantic period in human history. From the time Christopher Columbus and Vasco da Gama and their friends left Portugal and Spain and sought to find, quote, the new world, right? From that period in 1472, 1460 something, up until the last, say, 10 years, effectively, we've had a Euro-Atlantic, period in human history where almost every economic activity, every cultural activity, I mean, we are all speaking English here, which was a consequence of that Euro-Atlantic interaction. And I think that the challenge we are facing is that when we move looking into the next decades, it's clear that the Chinese economy, Chinese civilization is now on the ascendancy. And this has cultural, religious, spiritual, economic, health, environmental consequences. And in a certain sense, COVID, whether we like it or not, is one of the consequences of the Chinese presence. If one will recall, when the Europeans first came to North America and to Southern America, the historians and epidemiologists will remind us that the illnesses that the Europeans came to North America with, not in any malevolent sense, killed actually more people than all the wars that were had. And in a certain historical sense, it's not surprising that COVID started somewhere clearly in China. There's a whole lot of debate as to whether it was manipulated and it came from a lab or it was just a zoonotic transfer that came from a bat. But that scientific debate aside, my view is that I think the West, both Christendom, Islam, African religions, all of us are going to have to grapple with the rise of China. And in my judgment as a risk analyst in my professional sense, I don't think the world is ready. Yes, to give you an example, just yesterday or so, the G7 ended their big summit in Cornwall. And when you read a statement, which is 25 pages, 70 paragraphs, talking about every problem on earth, China is mentioned 4 times, exactly 4 times. And yet, every single problem they mentioned, from Belarus to environment, to COVID, to gender equality, to food security, there is not a single problem on the planet which can be resolved without Chinese leadership. There is not one. So I think that we as Africans, and those of us who favor freedom and the human experience and human integrity, and in a certain sense, the dignity of man, and I use man here not in its gender sense, but in its broader normative sense. We really are grappling with a major challenge because the Chinese civilization, if one would call it that, and its roots in its modern iteration do not have the same set of values that the Western systems do. So whether it's Africa or Canada or Europe, how do we transition? It's a bit like, I say to people, it's a bit like you are a First Nations person, as we say in Canada, or you're a Native American, as you may say in the United States, and Europeans have arrived in North America, and you are used to a certain worldview, a certain way of living, a certain set of values. And the Europeans are bringing a completely different value system. And it took most of these native communities a long time to even understand what was happening. And by the time most of them understood it, they had been wiped out. And unfortunately, I sense that we are doing something similar in both Africa and the West. We haven't come to a certain epistemological understanding of what the rise of China would mean. And I think that to me, as an African, as someone who favors the dignity of the human from natural conception to natural death, that to me is really the biggest problem or challenge on earth. Not that we have to fight China or no, but we have to first understand they have a different basis, a different framework. And how do we sort of achieve what we need to achieve, whether it's the sanctity of life, whether it is freedom of expression, whether it's the exchange of economic articles of value. How do we do this, free trade, etc., within their rubric? Because if we can't, then we'd have conflict.
Okay, good. Thank you, Sebastian. I think there's a number of follow-ups. I'd actually like to ask all of you about what you think about Belt and Road Initiative. And so, but let me go just to Father George for a minute. And Father George Admike, could you talk a little bit about what do you think are some of maybe the biggest challenges, biggest opportunity in Africa, kind of broadly? So Susan outlined COVID, health, and then in a sense, the opportunity that indigenous Africa has that it's not taking advantage of. And then Sebastian laid out, I think, the threat of China, which I just want to say, I think it's really interesting how you're making this parallel between, say, the European colonization of the New World and the value systems that come in. And I want to talk about value systems between the West and Africa right now. And so, Father George, what would you say? Any kind of big picture themes? What would you add to that? And then we can start to go into more specifics.
Okay. For me, I have 2 points. One positive, and on the positive side, the young population of Africa is a positive sign, because Africa, especially Nigeria, has a lot of young people who are ready, who are disposed to work, to turn things, resources into capital. But they are not given the opportunity. They are not given the assistance needed to transform those resources into capital. And the biggest challenge for me is the leadership. If I use Nigeria as a case in study, we have the problem of leadership. We have the 11 leading first-class brains, people who are resourceful, who are ready to transform Africa. But the leadership is clueless. They do not know anything, and they are inept and corrupt. As it happens in Nigeria, it also happens in many other African nations. So I see the problem of leadership. Then when you extrapolate it, then you get 2 bad Samaritans. The first bad Samaritan is the Chinese totalitarianism. And the second bad Samaritan is the Western ideological imperialism. So So I align myself with what Sebastian said about China. In Nigeria, we are experiencing Chinese grip on the whole nation. And all of us are afraid what will happen by next 20 years, because the totalitarian nature of Chinese government and civilization is being imported into Africa. And China wants to take over many African nations in other ways. Look at what happened in Sri Lanka, where China took over the port, and they took over part of that nation because they were not able to pay some of the debts. China doesn't care about ethics, morality, principles, values. No, what they are interested in, once you give them business, once you give them the opening to come in, they allow you, the government, the leadership, to do whatever you want, provided that you allow them to do whatever they want. And gradually, inadvertently, you give them the space to take over the nation. And when they come, now they are not interested in morals. But tomorrow, they will come in with those things. They are coming gradually. So that's for me, the positive element is the population, the young population, the resourceful population we have in Africa, in Nigeria, but they are not being tapped, they are not being used, they are not being utilized, they are not being transformed to capital for betterment of the society.
So first, you talk about China, and there you have the Belt Road Initiative and this question. I'm going to pause for China for just a second. I think it's really important because let me just say, I think in the Chinese question is that, there's a lot of propaganda around the Belt and Road Initiative, that one belt, one road, and it's going to be all prosperity for all. But as you've pointed out, Father George and Sebastian, it's both an economic question, but it's also an anthropological question. Like what's the good life? Okay, so I'm going to say something a little provocative, and I want all three of you to, tell me how I probably am like crazy and have lost it here. But, as I listen to you talk and I think about, Father George, your point, so you have the Bad Samaritan of China, and we'll go back to that, and Sebastian brought that up. And then you have the Bad Samaritan of the West, which you said was ideological imperialism. Pope Francis has called it ideological colonialism. People like Oya Banuju Akocha wrote a wonderful book called Target Africa. And as you know from some of my work, I'm very critical of all this population control program, which I think is inherently racist and et cetera. All right. So let me say, this is my provocative statement. Sebastian and Father George especially have talked about this idea of human dignity, of the dignity from conception to natural death. Oya Banuju Akocha talks about these are deep African values. Now, we know that, every civilization, every culture has its problems, and there are some anti-life elements to different indigenous African cultures. And there are some pathologies in African cultures and in Western cultures and in European, and there's pathologies and positives. Everywhere. But let me say this as my provocative question. As I listen to you, it's kind of interesting question. One could make the case that Africa, broadly understood, is the contemporary inheritor, of Western values.
Absolutely.
By which I mean, the Jewish and Christian civilization and the respect for reason, right there. And so first of all, just very quickly before I finish my question, what do you think about this? Here you have this American guy making the case that Africa is the contemporary inheritor and, in a sense, protector of Western values, of the Jewish Christian traditions, which of course we know aren't actually Western in their origin, are they? Right? What do you think about that?
So,
with some African elements involved, of course, right? Go ahead.
Okay. So let me say it this way. Justin the Martyr mentioned that in every person and in every culture, there is logos spermaticos. That is, there is that reason, that spark of reason that comes from God. in every human being. So what happens is that the Judeo-Christianity came into Africa and they resonated with some values, because Africa, have some values, seeking for the world, seeking for the light, seeking for the gospel. So when Christianity came with the Judeo-Christian values, purified some of the elements in African culture, healed some, and raised some. So the Africa accepted these values wholeheartedly. Decades ago, some of these values started changing. For example, the Africa have value for life, defense life. Before Christianity, our value for life was imperfect. It was seeking the fullness in Christ. And Christianity brought that, because many centuries ago, because our forefathers did not understand the idea of twin. So they killed twin because they thought it was an abomination. But when Christianity came and shed the light of reason and gospel, then our people understood that every life is to be protected from conception to natural death, whether they are twin or not. We accepted that. Suddenly, the same people that brought the gospel, some of them now came back to tell us that for convenience, you can remove the baby, you can kill the baby. For comfort, for business, for whatever reason, you can terminate the life. So many Africans are resisting. So in the same way that we were polygamous, so marrying many wives, and Christianity came and told us, no, that God designed it, a man and a woman. Africa now abandoned the old polygamy and accepted this new, this gospel, the fuller gospel. And when we accepted it, the same West came back to tell us, no, that now it's freedom, it's license. Whoever you want to marry you, Africa said, no, you cannot be playing on us. So we have accepted this value and we stick to that. That's why, so Africa tries to insist on the sacredness of human life, on the indissolubility of the marriage and marriage, traditional marriage between a man and a woman, and those Christian principles. So Africa tried to insist on those. And because I said, it's Christianity shedding light on the elements in the culture. And those elements are value for life, respect for other people, for public opinion, but also respect for elders, respect for marriage institution, marriage between a man and a woman, and not between a man and a man or a man and a dog. Some of these principles. So Africa feel, okay, this is the way to go. And Christianity has let us see this and appreciate it. So leaving that again to this new form of ideological imperialism or colonialism, that is why many African nations are resisting and pushing back. Because number one, it doesn't accord to reason. Number two, it doesn't align with our faith. Number three, it's against our culture. So these three elements, reason, faith, and culture, these ideologies fight and are contrary to these principles. And we say, no, we are not following that path. Now, these nations say, we can't help you unless you, so each aid or loan or grant they are bringing, they are touching strings. They say, we can only give you money for this or assist you in this if you accept to cut down your family to 2 children or 1 child or 3 children, if you agree to artificial birth control, if you agree to gay marriage, if you agree to abort, if you liberalize abortion. No, these are the things, so we call it ideological imperialism. And today, again, we have gone to another level, which is gender ideology. I said, no, that being a man and being a woman, those are they're not anthropological facts. They are social constructs, which can be changed with time. So Africa is resisting on one side, these issues. On the other side is China. So I wait. If you ask me a question on China, then I can elaborate more.
These are challenges facing Africa. What to do? What do you think the response should be? And I think it does connect back to, in a sense, local capacity, because the more local capacity that Africa can develop, the more it can say, no, we don't want your foreign aid. We don't want your ideological colonialism. We're going to build it ourselves. What do you say, Susan?
I have a personal example of this. When I was, my daughter is turning 26 this year. When I was pregnant with her, I was in Phoenix, Arizona. All this beauty of science and all that, I go in for tests, and they say, oops, there seems to be a problem. What is the problem? The child looks like she's going to be on a spectrum. We need to do an abortion. Can we do an abortion? I said, no, I'm not going to do an abortion. Why won't you want to do an abortion? This child might turn out to be Down syndrome and this and the other thing. And I was new. I just come from Uganda, still doing my first minimum wage job and stuff like that. They said, you won't be able to look after this child. I said, with everything that is in me, I'm going to keep this life. So what did I do? I called my mother. My mother locked up the house and came to Phoenix to be with me. My brothers came to be with me so that I could stand. Every single time I went to the doctors, there was papers for me to sign to have an abortion. And I said no. I remember one time it got to a point, I was a certain number of weeks, and there's only one state in the US that would let me have an abortion at that time, which is Utah. They said, I think I was at close to 36 weeks. They said, the doctor said, we can take you to Utah right now. You can go to Utah and have an abortion. If you miss this window, you won't be able to do that.
Yeah.
I said no. Then I remember looking the doctor in the eyes and I said, if I take this life, what are the chances that all my other pregnancies won't have the same issue? He said, oh no, if you'd have this abortion, we would recommend that you don't have any more children. Matter of fact, when we go in to have the abortion, we will tie your tubes to make sure. Long story short, I said no. They had me sign. Even when I was going into
delivery.
They asked me. They said, okay, we have a couple here, an elderly couple here that can take this child away and help you raise it, and we will go ahead and tie up your tubes and all that. My daughter is going to be 25. She's doing a doctorate in clinical psychology at the University of Tallahassee. So when you are in a position of weakness, and somebody keeps on pounding, I mean, like every time, after some time I said, I don't want to have any more tests. So this goes back to what the two gentlemen were saying, is that you are almost pushed in a corner because, if you don't do this, we won't do this. This is me in the United States of America.
Well, I think it's a very important story, because I think it's an important story for the United States, and it's an important story for Europe, and it's an important story for Africa. I mean, the eugenics movement really developed in the early 19th century. Before it went to the Nazis, it was very prevalent in the United States. It really influenced, then it influenced the Nazis. And so it was like, oh, we better kind of push that away. But it never really left, and it's back, it's increasing. And I think this idea, and there's also, and I'm provocative, I sometimes joke that luckily I don't have any friends to lose, so I can just say but I think it's deeply racist. I mean, I think you see this, for example, in the way African Americans are treated, the number of abortions of African Americans. You see it, for example, in the way the United States treated India with forced sterilization, with participation from the elites. So I want to say that, I mean, they're often African Indian elites that participate with this. You look at the work of Planned Parenthood, of Mary Stopes, you see deep-seated kind of eugenics and racism that is part of this. And I think We don't want to take this seriously because it's not polite, but I think it's a fact that we have a deep-seated eugenics and racist approach in a lot of the way we think about poverty, and we don't think about it in terms of human flourishing. And this is where I think, in a sense, some of the values that you bring about, that's where, like, what is the purpose of life? I sometimes will say this, and some of you heard me maybe talk about this. Like, first of all, the idea that population causes poverty is just wrong. Okay. Second of all, when people are given the opportunity, they can create so much more than they would consume. But the most important thing is, it doesn't matter whether someone is productive or not. That's not where they get their dignity of life and their value of life.
It's inherent.
Yeah, and I think it's a real problem from the West. So as a Westerner, I think, and Ratzinger is really solid on this, that this attitude of colonialism, ideological colonialism, undermines and is a real pressure. It's a propaganda pressure. You see it from big tech, you see it across the board. And I think, Susan, your point is so important. Like, you're propagandized and pressed from a place of weakness. Come on, do this. And I think, so my question would be, okay, how does Africa resist? Is there anyone in Africa who's saying, no, we're not taking it. We're not taking this foreign aid. We're going to do our own thing. And is there a good model to use? What would you say about that? I mean, feel free, of course, to correct me. I mean, if you think I'm wrong, tell me. I mean, this is part of our debate here, discussion. But A, do you think I'm wrong? And B, where's the capacity, the resources, or the leadership from Africa to say no and to build this local capacity that really does become a place for flourishing and opportunity?
Now, when we started, you were looking for the biggest challenge that the continent faces, and this is one of those. I think it's also Father George who had talked about the problem with leadership. The problem is that there's not that many leaders on the continent right now that have that backbone, especially when it comes to China. Because China comes with literally they come with suitcases of money and most of the leadership we have is going to sign off. There was I should have for some reason I thought we were talking about entrepreneurship. I didn't prepare properly for this.
But it's connected. It's connected.
Because there is and I can't bring it up quickly right now. But there's a lady who it is actual talk about. They talk about how when you're going to a business meeting, if you're bringing a business meeting to North America, say to the Canadian government and all that, you or to the US government and all that, you have lawyers and all lined up half the table, right? They will go through that. They will give you that document. They'll say, oh, let's get our lawyers to read through. We will get back to you, right? And they will analyze that document, and they'll do that. Most times, when businessmen will come into countries in Africa and meet with the minister of this or the other person. They come 2 days later. They are gone with their deal signed. You know why? Because they want most of the people charged with negotiating for the country will not even take the time to read the document. So the document comes, I think a document comes like this. If you sign here, this company will do this, and the other. All you have to do, focus over here. All you have to do over here is your responsibility as a government. You will sign over this. 2 hours later, that document is signed, the pictures are taken, and the person is off on the plane with their document signed. We need to have some leaders that can stand up and say no. Without but part of it is also, like in my situation, they get us, like right now, people are dying. Do you need vaccines? Okay, you need vaccines. We can send you vaccines at this point or whatever. We can send you this. You sign here. In that desperation, if they say sign here, but on top of the vaccines, we're going to also give you this amount of whatever, people sign. So we need model leadership. I don't know if my brothers have, you know, very good solid examples, but most of the examples, and I want to that I have are the opposite way.
If I may just jump in just briefly, I think the connection to entrepreneurship to me is so straightforward, it's so fundamental, it's so obvious, which is that the people resisting this are the entrepreneurs, because the entrepreneur fundamentally creates value. He or she fundamentally has independence. He or she fundamentally is not waking up and sitting in a market in Onitsha or in Lagos or in Kampala or in Accra or in Cairo waiting for Mr. Miller in Michigan to send him or her money to do a program. So entrepreneurship, in my judgment, is the way back to strength, because poverty creates a weakness of the soul. Poverty creates a weakness of the human spirit. Poverty creates a weakening of the human dignity. And the way you restore dignity is by effectively helping that person to stand on their feet, to be able to create some economic value, to be able to take care of their children, to be able to afford basic things for their family. So in a certain sense, I think that for me, my support for entrepreneurship, for trade, is not based on profit. It's not based on the technocratic sense of how much GDP are we collecting. No, it is based on the fact that the entrepreneur, that small farmer, that small person selling in the market, that person who's created an idea, who is able to sell it and get a little bit of money, is the strongest man in Africa. The strongest woman in Africa, to me, is not a president. The strongest man in Africa, to me, is not the billionaire. It's that person who is able to create, through entrepreneurship, some value so that he can provide basic food, basic shelter, basic healthcare for his or her family, and be able to say, no, I won't do that. So if, going back to our dear sister Susan's very harrowing story, and I've heard so many such stories, if Susan was standing on her feet at the time, and as she rightly said, she had just come to America and it was a minimum wage job, but if she was able to stand on her feet at that time, and she's such a strong sister, to be able to stand even when she was weak, and to be able to support her daughter. So I think that that's the connection to entrepreneurship that the Acting Institute and others of such goodwill should support. It's not so much how much money did you make. Is that by helping these people to stand on their feet, they can say no. They can say yes to human dignity. They can say yes to life. They can say no to these technocratic solutions.
It seems to me one of the things, if I hearing from you, that is interesting is that it's a multifaceted way of thinking about the problems, challenges, and opportunities in Africa today. That it's not simply, oh, Africa's problems come from the outside, or that Africa's problems are simply internal, but that in fact, that Africa has problems that are internal, self-generated. There's internal leadership problems, corruption, etc. Then there's problems from China and problems from the West, and those are different problems. And I think that's a valuable point, because I think so often we can try to say, well, the real problem with Africa is, the United States or Europe or China and or African leadership. And I think it is what you hear from all three of you is these are really complex, multifaceted problems that are interrelated. And the other, so that's the problem side. But what's interesting to me, and it does, I think, go back to Sebastian's point on entrepreneurship, is that the person must be at the center of the economy and the center of society. And it's not this radical individual of contemporary Western life, but an embodied person who's embedded in a community. And that the idea of the goal for African development is not simply more money and more liberation or sexual liberation, but in fact, human flourishing, which includes economic development as just a part of everything. That would be the kind of summary points of what I'm getting from all of you. I have to say there's a lot of confirmation bias there because I like all those things. So maybe I'm just reading into it and saying that's what you should hear. But why don't you all react to me? Am I missing a point? What would you add to that kind of summary? Because I'm actually quite I'm quite I like it. I think it's a very integrated, multifaceted approach that really grounds everything in who the human person is. Sebastian, why don't you start? We'll go Sebastian, Father George, and we'll end. We started with Susan. We'll end with Susan.
Well, thank you so much again, the Acting Institute, for hosting this wonderful dialogue. I think we cannot forget that when in Acts, when Philip left, the first person he spoke to was the Ethiopian eunuch who was heading to Ethiopia. And we cannot forget that in even Catholic history and theology, I mean, the great theologians from North Africa, Augustine of Hippo, which is in Tunisia, etc. So I think at the very foundation of Christianity, the African input into the theology of what we now call the Universal Catholic Church was fantastic. If you go into the Islamic side, again, when Muhammad was being sacked from Mecca, he ran to Djibouti, he ran to Ethiopia with some of his followers. And again, there was an input there. So I think fundamentally what I am arguing is that the African culture itself has within it all these wonderful strands. And at the dawn of the 21st century, with the technocratic kind of West sort of breathing on the left and the technocratic Chinese also breathing on the right, the Africans, in a certain sense, still stand as they've stood for millennia for the dignity of man. And in a certain sense, the best way we all can encourage that is by encouraging entrepreneurship and by supporting entrepreneurship, because the entrepreneur, if you are working even in the government as a school teacher and you have a small business enterprise and the school says do X and you know that it's good, it's bad, and you don't want to do it, you can actually quit your job and go and run your enterprise. If you're a police officer and you are being asked to take bribes and you don't want to take bribes and you have a small enterprise, you can go and do it. If you're a government official and you have to sign some bad contracts to saddle your country with debt for 100 years and you don't want to do it, you can go and do that. So I think entrepreneurship to me is sacred. It's something which is we become co-creator with God in a certain narrow sense, not in creating human beings necessarily, but in co-creating ideas, products, services. And I think that it is part of that work that is given in Genesis to go forth and to till the land and to create and to take care of it. So I think that to me, entrepreneurship from our perspective should be based not on profits necessarily, on just accumulating more money in the bank account, but like Michael said, to really center it in the human flourishing, that not just economics, but the spiritual, the human, the individual, not in a Western sense of one person, but the individual within his family, within his community, within his nation. Thank you.
Thank you, Sebastian. Father George?
Just by way of conclusion, that Africa is like someone crucified between two thieves. And the one thief is the bad thief, China. And the other thief is the good thief, the West. But the West, hoping that he repents, like the other thief repented and got salvation. Most Africans prefer to go with the West because the foundation, not the foundation, the superstructure of the civilization and development in Africa came from the West. And so you can compare the West and and China. But if the West is able to remove some of the bad eggs, and which is the ideologies, the bad ideologies coming from the West, there's ideological imperialism. So with that, Africa is good to go. Africa must therefore look deep, realizing that labor is good. Man realizes himself through labor, and appreciate the good news of business. Work and business, both of them are good news for Africa. And if Africa appreciates through the help, multi-layered assistance from the church, from civil society, from entrepreneurs, it will leverage on the capacity they have. We'll be able to turn our resources into capital. So, and I want to thank Acton in a special way, because through Acton conferences, trainings, and programs, Acton University, many African leaders or future leaders, both from the church and outside the church, have benefited. And each one of us, we're all doing one thing or the other to improve the lot of Africa. That way, Acton Institute is a gift that keeps giving. So the ripples are growing. Those snowballs will eventually turn into avalanche. Those sparks will turn into flames of development in Africa, integral, holistic development, and not just technocratic, materialistic development, but development of the whole man, of the person, to recover the truth of the human person, and knowing that human person is embedded in a relationship, in existence with all others. And what is development is that I'm able to flourish and be the best version of myself. That way I can improve my society. So thank you so very much for the teachings, for the lectures on anthropology. And that is what is needed. The human person is key. And the human person rooted in Christ or rooted in God, the human person with self-knowledge of his identity, awareness of his capacity, awareness of his resources, and awareness of means through which to turn his resources into deliverables, into capital. That is what we need in Africa. So thank you so very much. I appreciate the opportunity of being here. Thank you.
Susan, how about we end with you?
I'll only add one other thing that Africa is blessed with going forward: our young population. This young population is a force that, if we harness it well, if we upskill them and give them the skills they need, as we all are talking about here, to become entrepreneurs, to know that they don't have to die on boats escaping to go to other places, that they have what they have at home. This will do so much for the continent. Because every time you hear about a boat sinking off a coast of this, young people losing hope in where they are because of missed opportunity, that is a tragedy in itself. So with chances like this, with what you're doing at Acton, Michael, with every as Father George said, with every spark, with every little snowball, if we, as blessed as we are to have these forums like this, to have influence, whether we are influencing one or two, if we each at every corner or every opportunity take that extra second to encourage a budding entrepreneur, to give them hope and say, you know what, hang in there, like the apprenticeship program, like over here, in Canada and the US, they call them interns and stuff like that. If we can even just encourage each entrepreneur to work with one person, and we upskill this mighty force of young Africans that are ready to work and are looking for opportunity, I think Africa has a bright future. And we are the fastest growing population. Father George, Nigeria is the head of the chart. I think, babies are born every second in Nigeria. So we can, if we really put our mind to it and encourage this young generation. That's where our hope lies, in training, encouraging entrepreneurship, and that core value of life. We are going to go very far. I am so humbled to have been here, and thank you, Action, and thank you, Michael, thank you, Sebastian, and Father George. It's been a fantastic conversation.
Okay, thank you very much, Susan, and thanks to Sebastian and Father George. This has been really good for me. I really learned a lot. I've been inspired. I think it's an inspirational conversation because in the face of challenges, in the face of difficulties, in the face of some large, big questions, both cultural, ideological, economic, there's this sense of human agency, and that life is good, that being is good, and that we can't create utopia, we can't create heaven on earth, we cannot, but we can really improve our societies by focusing on that dignity and creative capacity of the person. So very inspirational to me. Thank you very much to all of you. And thanks for joining this year's Acton University 2021. And I hope we can see all of you next year, God willing, live and in person at Acton University 2022. So thanks to all who've listened. Thanks to Susan and Sebastian and Father George. And for all of you who've taken the time to listen to this panel on Africa and entrepreneurship, please feel free to send us comments, and we'll have links to all the bios of the participants and all other things. So thank you again for joining Acton University 2021.